AITA for outsmarting my wife after she coldly handed me divorce papers? My name is Paul Whitaker. I am 46 years old, and up until 18 months ago, I was the kind of man who described his life as good when asked and who meant it seriously. Not because I was a particularly lucky man. I am a mechanical engineer. I work for an industrial manufacturing company in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I have been in the same place for 16 years, rising slowly but steadily. Not because I had built what I wanted to build, and that seemed sufficient to me. We have a house in a suburban residential neighborhood in the north of the city. We bought it 12 years ago when our second son was 3 years old and the eldest 7. We paid for it over 15 years, but we made advance payments, and we paid it off in 11 years. It was one of the most satisfying moments of my adult life. Going to the bank with Emily, signing the final papers, going out to eat to celebrate. Emily is my wife, or was. The terms of present and past get complicated when a relationship is legally in the process of resolving, but emotionally resolved for much longer. We have 2 sons, Jackson, 22 years old, who already lives in Denver and is pursuing a master's degree, and Mason, 18 years old, who lives with us and is in his senior year of high school. Mason was in many ways the reason I acted with the patience with which I acted. I did not want what was inevitably going to happen to occur before he had finished this cycle. My calculation worked well, even though Emily and I have only been married for 20 years. We met in college. She was studying business administration, me engineering. We got married at 27 when we both had a stable job and the certainty of that age where you know exactly where you are going. For many years, it was a good marriage, not perfect, none is, but functional in the real sense of the term. We built things together, we made decisions together, we respected each other on the essentials. Emily managed the household finances because she was gifted at it, and because for me, the daily detail took more work. I earned more, she organized better. We divided the responsibilities with the practical logic of a couple who understands that efficiency matters. This division of responsibilities, which was for years a strength, became the main instrument of what came next. The bank accounts were joint. The main account was where my salary arrived and from where all the household expenses went out: mortgage, utilities, school, food, insurance. There was also a joint savings account that we had built with discipline since the beginning of the marriage, and which at the time all this started contained about $300,000. Emily had total access to both. I had technical access, but I rarely checked in detail because I trusted the system that was working. I put the money in, she administered it. That had worked well for 16 years, and then it stopped working, even though it took me a while to understand it. The signs arrived with the subtle precision of things that you do not want to be what they are. The first was small. A Friday in October, 2 years ago. I walked into the kitchen while Emily was talking on the phone. When she saw me, she lowered her voice and turned slightly toward the window. That in itself was nothing. People have private conversations. But it was the instant she turned, that quarter of a second where she decided to move away from me while continuing to speak, that registered as unusual. Not what she did, but the reflex to do it. The second sign arrived a few weeks later. Emily had started working on her laptop with the screen at a different angle than usual, not completely with her back to me, but tilted enough so that I could not easily see what she was doing. Again, nothing dramatic, the kind of adjustment one can make without thinking about it, but that I, who work with tolerances, measurements, and angles, noticed. The third was a November afternoon when I came home from work and Emily was in the bathroom. Her phone on the kitchen table vibrated with a message. I did not look at it. It was not my habit to check her phone, but I saw the notification banner before it disappeared. The message was from someone named Attorney Kessler and started with the words, "That is it. It is confirmed," before the screen turned off. Attorney Kessler, an attorney, probably a lawyer. Something confirmed, I kept that. I said nothing. In January of the following year, I examined the account statements with more attention than usual, not out of specific suspicion, or at least that is what I told myself, but because we had to do the annual tax filing and I needed to have a complete overview. What I found took me a couple of hours to process. In the savings account statements, there was a series of transfers that started in August of the previous year, not large sums all at once, which would have been immediately visible, but medium amounts distributed irregularly. $750 in August, $950 in September, $950 in October, $950 in November, $1,250 in December. The total in 5 months was $4,600. The transfers were going toward an account that I did not recognize. Trying to identify the recipient, the bank application only showed the last 4 digits of the destination account ending in 7734. It was not an account I had registered. It was none of the supplier or service accounts that I knew. The examination of the checking account revealed something else. 2 payments to a legal platform that I did not recognize either in October and December of $700 each. The description said family law and asset planning. Family law and asset planning paid from our joint account for a service that I had not contracted nor known existed. That night, I did not sleep well, but I did not say anything either. What followed this discovery was a period where I observed with the attention of someone who knows there is something to find, but who does not yet have enough information to know what. Emily and I continued to live together, to share the bed, to eat at the same table, to have conversations about Mason, about the house, about everyday life. Superficially, nothing had changed, but there was a different texture in the coexistence. One that I would attribute, if I had to describe it, to the sensation of being in a room with someone who has a secret and who accustoms their body to behave as if they did not have it. The calls she cut short or diverted when I was nearby were more frequent. Not always. That would have been too obvious. But on 4 or 5 occasions, over a period of 2 months, I entered a room and Emily's phone would disappear into her pocket with the specific speed of someone who has developed that reflex. She went out more, not in a dramatic way, not in a way to generate an obvious confrontation, but with the type of gradual increase that can always be explained by something reasonable: meeting with friends, dentist appointment, bank errands. Every excuse was plausible. The accumulation of plausible excuses started to be the least plausible thing. What I was doing during this period was building an internal record, date, observation, pattern. I did not write it down anywhere yet. I simply accumulated it in the part of my mind that keeps the data I do not yet know what I am going to use for. I must be honest about what was happening inside me during these months, because the version of this story that places the emphasis solely on strategy and silent movement loses something important if it does not include what it cost to arrive at that strategy. There was a part of me that wanted everything to have an innocent explanation. The transfers could be something Emily was organizing as a surprise, a separate savings for a plan she wanted to present to me at the right time. The cut short calls could be conversations about that plan. Attorney Kessler could be the lawyer of a member of her family in a procedure that had nothing to do with me. That part of me, the one that had spent 20 years building a life with this woman, the one that remembered the face she had when Jackson was born, the one that had been in the room when Mason took his first steps. That part did not want what the data suggested, but I am an engineer. I work with systems, and systems do not lie when you read them completely. What I had were regular transfers toward an unknown account that totaled $22,400 in 9 months. Payments for family law consulting from our joint account, communication behaviors consistent with someone who hides conversations. A sensation of distance that had arrived gradually, but which, seen in retrospect, had an identifiable starting point around July of the previous year. July, 4 months before the first transfer that I had found. What had happened in July that could have initiated this process, I do not know with certainty. What I do know is that something initiated it, and that she is the one who initiated it, and that she did it without telling me anything. This certainty, when I finally completely accepted it, was not an explosion. It rather resembled the moment when a diagnosis that one expected not to happen arrives. A sort of settling in. From now on, this is the real terrain. I decided to observe before acting, not out of cowardice nor paralysis, but because I understood that any movement I made prematurely would give her time to adjust her strategy, and that what I needed was complete information before she knew that I had the information. In the first week of February, I asked the bank for the first time in years for the detailed statement of the last 18 months of the 2 accounts. I did not ask for it online. I went in person to the branch and I asked for it on paper, signed and stamped, because I wanted to have physical documents that could not be altered. The complete statement revealed that the transfers had started not in August as I had initially seen, but in June. There had been 2 movements in June that I had not seen because they were classified differently. A transfer of $800 on June 3rd and another of $1,200 on June 17th. The actual total in 9 months was $22,400. I also noticed something that I had not seen before. In September, there had been the opening of a certificate of deposit of $20,000 from the joint savings account. The certificate was in the name of Emily only. That was legally possible because she had access to the joint account, but the resulting certificate was solely hers. $20,000 in a financial instrument in her exclusive name, plus $22,400 transferred toward an unknown account. Total, in 9 months, $42,400 moved out of our joint wealth. The savings account that had reached $300,000 was at $257,600 in 9 months. In the following weeks, I identified something else, the time pattern of the transfers. Each transfer had taken place between the 1st and the 5th day of the month, right after my salary was deposited and before I had a reason to check the general balance. It was careful timing, not random. I also identified that the destination account, the one that ended in 7734, received transfers of a value that varied but that always stayed below the amounts that trigger automatic bank reporting requirements. It was a careful quantity. It was not someone who made movements without thinking. I looked for the attorney Kessler whom I had seen in the notification in November with the last name and the city. A search in the Texas State Bar directory gave me 3 results. I examined all 3. One of them, Alan Kessler, had a specialty in family law and asset planning with a firm in a neighborhood an 8-minute drive from our house. I examined his website. Among these areas of practice, it explicitly said asset planning prior to the divorce process. Asset planning prior to the divorce process. I printed the page. I kept it in a folder. It was a March afternoon. Mason was at school. Emily had gone out saying she was going to the grocery store. I was in the living room with my coffee with the document folder in front of me examining what I had accumulated over the course of the last weeks. And at one moment of this examination, while I was looking at the timeline I had built, June, first transfer, September certificate of deposit, October payment to the lawyer, November, message from the attorney with something confirmed. Something fell into place in my head with the definitive clarity of when a structure that one saw as detached pieces suddenly reveals itself as a complete system. Emily was preparing the divorce. She had been preparing it since July of the previous year. At the very least, she had hired a lawyer specializing in asset planning prior to divorce. She had moved funds from our joint account toward own accounts. She had opened financial instruments exclusively in her name, and all this had been done with a methodology that showed that it was not an improvised decision. What she was building was a position of strength for when the time of the formal conversation would arrive, for when she would sit down in front of me and present me the terms. I closed the folder, finished the coffee, washed the cup in the sink, then I sat down again and I started to think about what I was going to do. The conversation arrived on a Tuesday in May, 3 months after I had completely understood what was happening. Mason was at a friend's house. Emily and I were alone. She sat down in the armchair. Me, in the armchair across from her, there was something in her posture, something prepared, slightly rigid, that told me that it was the conversation she had been rehearsing for a long time. Paul, we need to talk about something important. Sure, I believe that we both know that things between us have not been going well for a while, and I believe that the most honest and the most mature thing is to acknowledge it and to manage it in the best possible way. I gave her time. I did not interrupt her. I have thought a lot about this, and I believe that what suits us both is to separate in a civilized manner, without a fight, without hurting the children. I nodded slowly. I have spoken with a lawyer, she continued, who can help us do the process in the simplest way possible. What he proposes is that we agree on the terms between us without going to court in a contentious manner. What terms? I asked. She took out a sheet. She had brought it prepared, handed it to me. I read it with calm. What it said in summary: the house would be transferred to her name. Considering that she had administered the household for 20 years and that the children needed stability, I would have the right of use while Mason finished high school. After which, I will look for where to live. The savings account would be divided 50-50, but not on the current balance, which was $257,600, but on a reference balance that the lawyer had calculated by deducting administration and planning fees for a total of $42,400. The reference balance according to this calculation was $120,000 and my share $107,600. The car, a 2021 Honda CR-V that we bought 3 years ago, would go to her name for mobility needs linked to the household and the children. The proposal left me with $107,600 without a house, without a car, and with the expectation of abandoning the family home in about 4 months. I have thought about this for a long time, said Emily. I believe it is fair for both of us. I looked at her. I nodded my head. Give me time to examine it. That is all I said. That night with the sheet in front of me in the office, I analyzed the proposal with the objectivity of an engineer looking at a plan. The $42,400 of administration and planning fees that the lawyer had deducted from the reference balance was exactly the sum of the transfers toward the unknown account plus the certificate of deposit in the name of Emily. It was in other words a way to retroactively legalize the movements she had made months previously. If I accepted the terms such as they were described, I would sign a document that implicitly validated these movements as legitimate expenses of the household. The valuation of the house mentioned in the proposal was $440,000. I had bought it and paid for it. My name was on the deed. The proposal requested that I transfer it to her by recognizing only the value of the household administration work as counterpart. There was no mention of my years of exclusive economic contribution during the first 8 years of the marriage when Emily did not work and I paid everything. There was no mention of the advance payments I had made to liquidate the mortgage for years before expected, which represented tens of thousands of additional dollars that I had contributed. The complete calculation. If I accepted what she presented to me, I was leaving the marriage with a small fraction of an economic history of 20 years that included a house valued at $440,000, a car of $84,000, and a savings account that should have been at $300,000. The total wealth that she had identified was about $824,000. She was keeping $716,000, me with $107,600. That made 13%. It was not an amicable divorce. It was an expropriation with amicable language. What I did after having understood that was the most difficult thing I have done in my adult life. Not because it was complicated in terms of what it required to do, but because it required to maintain for weeks a performance that went completely against what I was feeling. I said nothing to Emily about what I had discovered. I did not change my behavior in a visible manner. I continued to have breakfast at the same table, to follow the same routines, to respond with the same calibrated normalcy of the previous months. What I could not do was to show her that I had understood the magnitude of what she was doing. Because if she knew that I knew, she would adjust her strategy. She could accelerate the financial movements. She could present the request before I had the time to protect what was mine. She could involve the lawyer in a more aggressive manner. What I needed was time, not much, 3 weeks, but enough to do what I had to do. 2 days after the conversation of the proposal, I told her that I needed a few weeks to think, that it was a very big decision and that I did not want to take it without having processed it well. She received it with the tranquility of someone who believes that her position is solid and who can wait because she knows that the terms favor her. That tranquility gave me the time I needed. During those weeks, I maintained the appearance of someone who considers the proposal with the normal sadness of the one who faces the end of a marriage. It was not completely fictitious. There was a real sadness, the sadness of 20 years that does not end well, and that leaves scars independently of what one does strategically. In 2 conversations with Emily during this period, I asked questions that sounded like the questions of someone evaluating if they can live with the terms. I asked about the process of transferring the house. I asked if the lawyer had considered the theme of support payments. I asked if there was flexibility in the time frame to leave the house. She answered with the calculated generosity of someone who feels she has the control and who can afford small concessions. She said that she would speak with the lawyer about the time frame. She said that the process could be manageable if we both cooperated. Cooperate, this word. During this time, I was doing 3 things in parallel that she did not know I was doing the first thing. I looked for a lawyer of my own, not by family recommendations, nor of mutual friends. I did not want the information to reach the wrong ears. I found him through a coworker who had gone through a difficult divorce 4 years ago and who recommended him to me specifically for his specialty in marital asset litigation. His name is Attorney Gregory Harlan with a firm in the center of Dallas. I met with him a Wednesday at noon by telling work that I had a medical appointment. I brought everything, the account statements, the sheet with the proposal, the information on the lawyer of Emily, the registry of the transfers, the documentation of the certificate of deposit. Attorney Harlan examined everything in silence for 40 minutes. When he finished, he looked at me. "Mr. Whitaker, what you show me is a case of dissipation of marital assets prior to the divorce. It is a practice that exists and that the judges know well. The movements are documented, the timeframes are coherent with deliberate planning, and the proposal that was presented to you disconnects these movements from the wealth division in a way that would not resist a contested proceeding. What can I do? Several things. And we must move before she presents the formal request. The second thing, I requested a formal evaluation of the house. Through the intermediary of Attorney Harlan, I hired a certified appraiser for an independent evaluation of the property. The appraiser came the following Thursday while Emily was at the grocery store. It took 2 hours. The resulting evaluation was $480,000, $40,000 more than what the lawyer of Emily had used in the proposal. The third thing was the most important. Attorney Harlan explained the options to me, and we proceeded with those that had the most immediate impact. First, we documented the unusual movements in the joint marital accounts and filed notice with the bank, creating an official record that the transfers had been flagged as inconsistent with normal household use. Secondly, Attorney Harlan filed a lease pendens on the property at the county recorder. A lease pendens does not prevent the sale of the property, but generates an alert at the recorder that any title company consults obligatorily before processing a deed. Any attempt to transfer the house without my consent or without a judicial process would generate an automatic block. Thirdly, we filed a request for temporary orders before the family court by documenting the movement of assets prior to the divorce and by requesting that the marital property be placed under conservation during the duration of the process. The temporary orders, when they are granted, freeze the capacity of one or the other of the parties to move assets from the joint property. The judge granted the temporary orders in 4 days. Fourthly, with the advice of Attorney Harlan, we prepared a counterpetition for divorce which, in legal terms, has different effects from the uncontested divorce that Emily had probably planned to request. The petition, when the conduct is correctly documented, allows the judges to consider the actions of the parties in the division of the marital assets. All this happened in 2 weeks without Emily knowing anything. There were 2 additional assets that Attorney Harlan helped me to secure. The car, the 2021 Honda CR-V, was registered in the name of both. Emily technically had the same rights on it as me. However, it was me who had paid for it and who used it mainly to go to work. By a documented asset declaration that we presented with the temporary orders, we established that the vehicle was part of the property in dispute and that its use or disposition remained subject to a judicial resolution. The certificate of deposit, the $20,000 that Emily had opened in her exclusive name, was the most delicate movement. Attorney Harlan explained that even if the certificate was in her name, if it could be demonstrated that it had been opened with funds from the joint account without the consent of the other spouse, it was part of the marital property subject to division. We established this in the documentation of the temporary orders with the account statement that showed the debit of the joint account as origin of the funds. For the $22,400 transferred toward the unknown account, the process was more complex. Without an identification of the holder of this account, we could not present a direct claim on these funds. However, we could document the movements as making part of the scheme of asset dissipation, which the judge could consider in determining the asset division. In practical terms, the judge could order that the division be calculated on the original balance of $300,000 and not on the reduced balance of $257,600. The night before the final conversation, Mason arrived at the house at 8 in the evening. We ate all 3 together. Emily had prepared a pot roast. Mason was talking about a project from school. The scene was completely normal from the outside. A family eating together a Wednesday evening. I was looking at this scene and I was thinking about the 20 years that had preceded it, about the son that we had formed together, about the fact that nothing of what was going to come after erased that these years had been real, that the good stages had been authentic, that Emily was not a bad person, but a person who had taken decisions that I could not accept without responding. I was also thinking about Mason, about the fact that the next day the world that he knew was going to start to change formally, even if in practice it had already changed for a long time. I had spoken with Jackson by phone the previous week without entering into the details, only by telling him that there would be important news soon and that everything would be fine. Jackson had asked if it was what he thought. I told him that yes. He remained silent a moment, then said, "Dad, do what you have to do." That supported me more than he probably knew. At the end of the dinner, Mason went to his room. Emily started to clear the table. I helped her as always. We washed the dishes in silence. "Tomorrow, we can talk," I said before going into the office. "Sure," she answered. There was nothing in my voice that alerted her. It was the voice of someone who has finally processed a difficult decision and who is ready for the conversation. Mason left for school at 7:15 in the morning. Emily and I were in the living room. She with her coffee, me with mine. I took out a folder from the table, the same folder that she did not know existed. "I had time to examine the proposal that you made to me," I said. "And there is something that you must know before we continue." I handed her the first sheet. It was the detailed statement of 18 months with the movements marked in yellow highlighter. "There are $22,400 transferred from our savings account toward an account that I do not recognize between June and December of last year, and there is a certificate of deposit of $20,000 opened in your exclusive name from our joint account in September." Emily said nothing. Her cup of coffee remained immobile. I handed her the second sheet. It was the notice of the flagged movements. I reported the movements to the bank. Here is the confirmation. The third sheet, the lease pendens on the property. There is a lease pendens filed at the county recorder on the house. No transfer of this property can be processed without a judicial process. The fourth, the temporary orders. The family court has granted temporary orders on the marital property 10 days ago. Neither of us two can move assets without judicial authorization while the process is active. The fifth, the counterpetition. My lawyer has presented a request for divorce with the documentation of the financial movements as support. Attorney Harlan already has a copy of everything that you see here. I placed the 5 sheets on the table. Emily was looking at me with an expression that took me a few seconds to identify because it was not the one I expected. It was not anger. It was the expression of someone who recalibrates a situation she believed completely under control and who just understood that it was not. The silence lasted about 2 minutes. I did not interrupt it. When she spoke, her voice had a control that told me that it was an intelligent woman who was already processing the implications. "When did you know it?" "I have been observing for a while." "For how much time?" "Enough. Paul, there were things that were not working. I needed to protect myself." "I understand." This answer destabilized her more than any argument that I could have given because it was not sarcastic, it was sincere. I understood that she had felt that she needed to protect herself. What I was not willing to accept was the manner in which she had chosen to do it. "What you did with the accounts," I continued. "The movements, the certificate, the proposal that did not reflect the reality of the wealth, that was not protecting yourself. That was trying to leave me with 13% of what we have built in 20 years. She did not answer to that. "There is an active judicial process," I pursued. "Attorney Harlan and the lawyer that you hired are going to negotiate the terms under judicial supervision. The wealth that is going to be divided includes the $22,400 transferred and the certificate of deposit calculated on the original balance of $300,000. The house is going to be evaluated with the independent evaluation that I requested, which is $480,000. The car makes part of the wealth in dispute. That is going to be very complicated," she said finally. "It does not have to be, but it is going to be fair." That was my last sentence in this conversation. I got up, I picked up my folder, and I went to work. The process lasted 8 months to resolve. It was neither short nor easy in the emotional sense, but it was orderly because we both had competent lawyers and because I had entered with a documentation that made it very difficult to support the original terms of the proposal of Emily. The final agreement negotiated under judicial supervision established that the house was sold to a third party. The value of sale was $470,000. The product of the sale deducted the title fees and the taxes was divided at 50% between the two, which corresponded to me $235,000. The savings account calculated on the original balance of $300,000 was divided at 50% $150,000 for each. The movements prior to the divorce, the transfers, and the certificate were included as part of the division, which meant that the judge compensated these amounts from the share of Emily. The car was sold too. The product of the sale divided at 50%. My total approximately $378,000 by considering all the parts. Hers approximately $220,000 after the adjustments for the movements that she had realized prematurely. It was not the 13% that she had planned to give me. It was 47%. I rent an apartment in the north of Dallas, near work. 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for Mason when he is there, one which for the moment is an office. It is not the house that I built for 20 years, but it is mine in the cleanest sense of the term. It is in my name, I call it mine. It does not depend on the goodwill of anyone. Mason is doing well. It is what matters to me the most out of all this. He finished high school in July. He obtained a good result on the college entrance exam and is going to enter into a Bachelor of Engineering in the same university where I studied. He told me by phone with the voice of the 18-year-old who does not yet completely know that to be a father of someone like that is the realization that surpasses any other thing. Jackson came to see me 2 months ago. We sat at the balcony of the apartment with beers, and we talked for 3 hours about everything, about the process, about the prior years, about what each remembered of the family that we had been. It was not an easy conversation. It was an honest conversation. What is better? Emily and I communicate in a civil manner when it is necessary for the children. There is no hostility. There is no warmth either. There is the functional distance of 2 people who have shared 20 years, and who now share only the responsibility of sons who are already adults, or almost. What I feel when I think about all this is not exactly satisfaction. It is something closer to the calm that comes after a prolonged period of tension. The sensation that the body has released something that it was carrying without knowing that it was carrying it. There are lessons that one learns in the most costly manner possible, and which precisely by this cost remain engraved in a way that has no equivalent in what one learns when everything is going well. What I learned about trust. To trust someone does not mean to delegate the knowledge of what is yours. Trust and knowledge can perfectly coexist. In fact, when they are real, they should coexist. The problem was not that Emily administered the finances. The problem was that I ceased to know what was happening with them. Because to trust meant to lose interest, and to lose interest left me blind for a sufficient time so that the damage would be significant. What I learned about strategic patience. When one discovers something that requires an action, the emotional urgency to react immediately works almost always against oneself. The time that I invested to observe, document, and prepare before making any visible movement was exactly what allowed me to arrive at the final conversation with all the information and with the protections already in place. What I learned about pain and clarity, the pain that a relationship of 20 years ends in the manner in which it ended. This one is real and independent of any financial result. The movements that I made did not eliminate this pain, but they allowed me to face it without the supplementary burden of having also lost what corresponded to me economically. That is not little, that is in fact a lot. And what I learned about children, the greatest protection that you can give to children in a situation like this is not to protect them from the reality of the process, but to show yourself as someone who manages adversity with dignity. Mason saw me cross 8 difficult months without exploding, without destroying the image of his mother, without converting the process into a spectacle. What I hope he will remember of these months is not the conflict. It is that his father knew what he was doing when the moment arrived to know. Comment. This story stayed with me long after I finished recording it. I've come to realize how deeply self-respect shapes the choices we make when life gets hard. Setting healthy boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary if we want to protect what truly matters. I respect how the father in this story kept his focus on being steady for his son through it all. Choosing peace over prolonged conflict can be one of the strongest decisions we ever make. Taking time to respond with clarity instead of reacting in the moment often leads to better outcomes. True healing begins when we handle difficult situations with dignity and quiet strength. I hope this encourages you to examine your own boundaries and relationships more thoughtfully. Remember that real responsibility includes being kind to yourself while doing what's right. If you like the stories, Don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.